Good morning, everyone. Thank you. And I'm here in Ohio. We don't have snow, but it sounds like you do. It's definitely a winter day, it sounds like. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. My name is Renee West. I am the Director of HR Consulting Services at Ray and Associates. We are an accounting firm in Ohio. And today we're going to be speaking and sharing some resources for you as it relates to managing and performance management for hybrid and remote workers. So we'll cover a lot of information today, and hopefully you can take away some key initiatives to move forward. So as far as our discussion, what we're going to go through today is talk a little bit about the current employment landscape, some changes and trends that we've seen over the past few years, look at some workplace demographics and how the workplace itself has changed and will continue to change, and also look at some statistics as it relates to remote and hybrid workforces. And then we wouldn't be talking about HR if we didn't talk about policies, looking at best practices for remote and hybrid workplace policies, looking at the process and structure of what those should look like, and then also how to tie into that accountability and expectations. And also talk about communication and some of the technology considerations as it relates to hybrid and remote workers as well. We're also going to talk through performance management as it relates to how to ensure we're providing solid performance management for those remote and hybrid workforce. And what are goals and how do those align with that as well? And also, as leaders of different types of demographics in the workplace, what are some best practices for you to navigate these changes and help to ensure that your people continue to thrive and grow in your organization? And also some resources for you as well. So as you know, that's a lot, but we're going to touch base here and start and go through and talk mainly about the employment landscaping. Each of us know that the workplace landscape continues to change and evolve. It seems like everyone talks about what it was like pre-COVID, what it was like after COVID. Many organizations now are challenged or have been challenged with decisions on, do they offer hybrid work? Do they offer, remote work schedules while balancing just the difference of the economy? Also looking at, who can work from home, who needs to be in the office, what are all those discussions look like? And also right now we have a multi-generational workforce. We'll talk a little bit later about what that means, but with that comes varied work ethics, different motivators, different communication styles. So you have all of these different demographics kind of in the same pool, all working together, and that can cause some challenges as well. So we just want to talk through what that looks like. When we talk about what the workplace looks like now, we also talk about the leadership. And I've heard and talked with many clients over the last couple years and here recently of, we're challenged with how do we continue to lead our people that might be on a remote or a hybrid work schedule. Just in general, what are our best practices and how can we continue to ensure that we as leaders are supporting our organization and supporting our people? And same with training of managers and supervisors on how can they lead teams in this different type of environment as well. If we look at some of the workplace demographics, we talked about a few minutes ago that the workplace is different. If you look right now, we currently have 4 different generations that are working in the workplace. Boomers, which of course my children tell me that's the part I'm in, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. So when you think about 4 different types of generations working in a workplace, what do you think about? Everyone has a different communication style. Everyone has a different learning style. Everyone has different expectations. So as an organization, when you are creating communications and you're creating items for your employees, you need to really take a step back and think about, how does certain generations, how do they like to communicate? Do they like to be in person? Does it need to be video? Can it be cell phone? And from a communication and learning perspective as well, they learn differently. For myself, I learn by actually looking and reading at something, where another generation, the millennials and the Gen Z, want someone speaking to them as to what and how they learn. So as an organization, really looking at that and learning, number one, what is your workforce? That's a big piece of where you are, and taking that time to really cater those communications, to make it easy for everyone to work together. Now, there's always going to be challenges, always going to be differences of opinions, but as an organization, doing the best that you can to help navigate that is helpful as well. And with that, with different generations as well, you have different backgrounds and diversity and different leadership styles. So inquiring with them as to what they're seeing and what they feel that they need from a performance perspective or a feedback perspective. We'll talk a little further about that evaluation for those remote and hybrid workers. Just in general, what is best and how can you help to structure that? This is actually very interesting to me as you think about, as the workplace continues to grow. We still have individuals that maybe were retired that are back in the workforce now, maybe even on a part-time basis, due to the talent shortage, where organizations are reaching back out to those skilled workers to ask them to come back into the organization, which can be a good thing. And as mentioned before, there's not as many people going into the workforce, so people are working longer. And again, that allows those demographics to continue to grow and work together even more. So very interesting as it relates to that. When we look at how has the workplace changed, these statistics that we're showing here probably have changed a little bit from the last time that I just did this a few weeks ago. But when we look at 2023, the average 12.7% of full-time employees work from home, while 28.2% work a hybrid model. Now, this varies by industry. Obviously, manufacturing is a little different. Certain roles cannot be, flexible or work from home. But of those that have that nature, currently 12.7%, like we said, do work from home. And that's across the board in multiple industries. And, we have seen organizations that have called individuals back into work, or still are starting to have that flow. We have talked with a number of clients and resources that maybe their workforce have come back as a hybrid model, where they've adapted that new regimen versus just having someone be solely at home or solely in the office. So we're seeing about 28.2% of employers have adapted that hybrid work model. And when you're, of course, recruiting, as Scott mentioned earlier, that's definitely something that individuals are interested in, is what are those opportunities as it relates to hybrid and remote work. And this is, again, something that continues to grow, will continue to evolve. The biggest piece is, that flexibility and organizations knowing what works and what does not work. And as we move through this discussion, we'll share some resources as well on how to manage that as you move forward. As we look at remote and hybrid policies, organizations that have adopted these type of work schedules, as an HR professional, we always want to be sure we have policies in place. Organizations should have defined policies in place for both remote and hybrid work. There should also be an eligibility and an employee request and an approval process. As I mentioned before, some organizations might have roles that just are not conducive to hybrid or remote work, and being able to identify those roles and provide those in a policy perspective as to what are approved roles and what are, not approved but could be hybrid. Again, that's part of that whole process. So if an employee is eligible, how do they go about requesting this? From a record keeping perspective, it is a best practice to ensure you have a request for, this type of process. You have an approval process, be it they submit a request to their supervisor, which is then given to HR for approval. Being able to have a consistent process in how you do that and how that is approved will also assist with mitigating any type of employment discrimination issues that could come up. And also within these policies, having expectations for the employee. We want to be sure that, and we'll talk a little further about this on the next slide, but what are the employees expected to do when they are remote or hybrid in the office? Expectations for managers and supervisors. If you're managing remote and hybrid workers, what are your expectations? What are you required to do to help to ensure that you are providing resources for your team? And the biggest piece of all of these policies that we see is accountability. Who has the accountability to ensure these items are done? What does that look like? And how does that help tie into performance that we'll talk about here a little bit later? But again, these are just samples. We also have sample templates that we are happy to share as it relates to these. These can be customized to your organization. But the biggest piece is being sure that you have them, that they are administered, and that they're administered consistently. So when we talk about work arrangement options and expectations, when you have these remote and hybrid type work and policies, and these come from questions that of individuals, such that have done this, that the employee wants to know, if they're hybrid, are they required to be in the office once a week, or is it for key meetings? Should the person in this position be available during certain hours if they're a remote worker? Say, is it 8 to 5? What happens if they're in a different time zone? Which are those expectations from a work perspective? Some organizations that we've seen have been, flexible as it relates to, you need to be online from a certain period of time. However, you still have that flexibility as long as the work is done. That's again where that performance and that accountability comes into play as well. So really defining that and helping to set those expectations for the workers. And also, what does being available mean? When you say be available, does it mean they have to be sitting at their desk with their video on? Does it mean that they can be out in their backyard and have their teams on and can still work and wait until they're contacted? Should they be available via phone? So really quantifying what is that being available as it relates to those policies. Obviously, if you're in the office from a hybrid perspective, that being available is you're there, and that's defined as well as answering questions and being available if your coworkers come in or your manager comes in. So a lot to think about as you kind of work through and define these. One of the other items that we talk through with clients is when you look at these type of remote and hybrid policies, work arrangements as it relates to how will projects be assigned and deadlines determined. If you have individuals that you're providing resources to and requesting projects, being very specific about when it's to be delivered, how it's to be delivered, what is your deadline. Again, all expectations that are part of that discussion between leaders and their team. Is there a checklist for all critical tasks associated with this position? So is there certain types, if the person's working remote that day, do they have to have certain items that are checklists through from a task perspective versus if they're hybrid the other days of the week? And also setting expectations, especially when you have remote workers, that when you have projects that you're requesting be done. What's the turnaround time? Again, being very specific. And when you set the expectation to them of if you receive a message or you receive a Teams message, what is a required turnaround time for you to reply to those? And when you're remote and hybrid, the emails, as a firm, we have guidelines that we are to return phone calls, emails, within 24 hours, but we always do that even earlier. But also from that remote perspective, set that expectation so that individual knows, even though they're not physically in the office, they're still required to abide by what you have as best practices in your organization. One of the other items that we talk through and look at a lot with organizations is communication and technology. And I know we talked a little further earlier on this today as well. But one of the biggest things that we want to talk through is, again, if you have remote and hybrid workers, what are your communication and technology resources and options? What is the best way for organizations to ensure that they can set up their employees for success? There's nothing worse than if you have a new remote or a hybrid worker, and the remote worker comes in to home and their technology's not working. Their computer, their laptop, their Teams isn't working. We all know that those tend to go down at times, and there's always little issues that you work through. But specifically, how can you ensure that it's a seamless process to utilize the technology and communication for your employees? Consider options for mobile apps that can help streamline communications as well. And we'll talk a little further here about how employers and managers can stay connected with their teams and colleagues and others. That's one of the biggest things that we're hearing from organizations that we talk to, is that ability to still keep remote and hybrid workers involved, and part of conversations and including them in meetings and feeling like they're all a part of that. And communication can be helpful with that. And we'll talk a little further about some of those resources. And also, when you're looking at the best types of communication, there's not one size app that fits all. There's, some organizations use a number of different apps for different types of communications and resources. It's a trial by error as well. So don't think that, you have to find one thing that absolutely has all the bells and whistles that you need. It'd be great to find that. And if you can, that's great. But really taking the time to find what is best to help your employees, define what goals, communication, and potential employee engagement can be with these. There's a lot of test studies and test groups where these different types of technologies have reviews. So as an employer, really take time and look at what those options are. And one of the other biggest things when you look at communication and technology is, how does this impact your organizational culture? Culture with all organizations is something that, we always hear is kind of the buzzword of, we want to ensure that even though our people aren't all in the same place at the same location, or maybe we have different offices as well, how can we ensure that our technology helps us stay in touch with each other, and how does that impact our culture? So look at your culture as an organization. Is it important for your people to be generating ideas in person via face-to-face meetings? If that's the case, can that be something that can be remotely shared, through Teams, through other types of apps as well? Or is your organization more the kind where people need to be in person, and the culture of your organization is seeing each other each day, talking in the coffee room, having breaks together, and really your employees are more energetic and conducive when they are in the office? So that definitely can be something that you need to think about as well. And with all of these types of interactions, communication and technology, how does it affect your company bottom line and the ability for you to perform? All organizations are in, of course, to be profitable, and you also want to ensure what you're utilizing from these perspectives, aren't astronomical and don't hit your bottom line and have you in the red. But I mean, the biggest piece is just really taking time to talk to your people. We've worked with organizations where they're trying to determine, should we keep it face to face? Should we keep people all in the office? Should we continue to have hybrid? Our biggest recommendation is talk to your people. Really have, an employee survey and see, what your people are thinking, what would be best for them. And that will help you kind of guide as you continue to move forward with these. One of the other things, as you look at technology and you look at communication and you look at different types of apps and things for your employees, Communicating with employees also means they're more than likely engaging via their phone or their apps, using their personal phones. As an organization, you should also be concerned from a cybersecurity perspective that you have your technology, your project management tools, your communications secure, and that your IT department is aware that these are the items and the software that you're using. As you know, cybersecurity is very hot topic now and a very big concern for organizations. You do not want to open your organization up to security risk if you have an app that your people are downloading and it has not been validated or secured through your organization. So really keep that in mind. Take some time to look at that. From a cybersecurity perspective, I'm hearing things, from employers of, they're going into individuals' LinkedIn accounts. They're, trying to get through, obviously, your email. I'm not going to be a cybersecurity expert. We have those in our firm to do that, but we do know there are so many ways of hackers trying to get into organizations. Going through your employees is probably the best way for them to try to do that. So again, take that time to really research what you're looking at. Keep in mind as well, if you have technology that your remote workers or any of your workers are using, even, anyone in particular, if they're a non-salaried employee, employers should be mindful whether the use of the app may be perceived as expectation to work off the clock. For instance, if messages are sent, emails are sent, and an individual answers it on off hours, should they be compensated for that time? What does that look like? So again, just some topics to think about as it relates to these types of communications. So I put some samples here. Please also keep in mind, this is not the top levels, but just a couple things for you to think about. Some of the top apps that we're hearing from organizations that they're using as it relates to communication, Slack, Zoom, of course, Teams, as we're using today, are very popular. Some of the top project management apps that we're hearing that have had some great resources, Trello, Rick, and Connect Team. We are not endorsing any of these at all, but we are just sharing that we've heard from organizations. These tend to be some of the top uses when it comes to technology considerations. So a lot for you to think about. So let's move into performance. This is, I know, everyone's favorite topic to talk about, performance expectations. When we talk about performance and performance management, I don't think I've ever spoken to anyone that says I love doing evaluations, but we know that it's important for our people and the growth of your organizations to have performance expectations and programs in place. So we're going to go through and talk a little bit about some of the best practices of how to continue to manage performance for those employees that might not be in the office every day and are also remote. We also mentioned earlier accountability. That's one of the biggest pieces that we can tie to performance when it comes to ensuring that you're managing your remote and hybrid workforce. Accountability measures in place for managers and employees. Those are important for all of those areas. What are some examples of accountability as it relates to performance expectations? One of them could be maintaining meetings and discussions as scheduled. One of the biggest things from a remote and hybrid is if you have meetings that you traditionally have every Monday at 10 a.m. with your remote team, please be sure you keep that meeting. There's nothing worse than your team getting ready to talk and know that this is our standard time, and you reschedule it every week to a different day, or you make it later, or you extend it. Now, we all know that individuals are sick. There might be a reason that you need to, but try to be as consistent as possible when it comes to these meetings that you're scheduling, because they expect it. And you as a leader and a manager also need to be that consistency for them to help drive that performance. Adhering to established timelines and deadlines. Those are other parts of accountability. If Jill says she will have the report to her manager, Bob, by Monday at 1 p.m., even if it's remote, that should be sent to him within that timeline. And what are the documentations to ensure that these tasks happen? We've talked to so many clients about what can we put in place to ensure that we can document that these are happening. So calendar invites are part of determining whether meetings were actually conducted and attended. Attendee listing from those meetings is part of that as well. Emails to validate if work is being sent in at the appropriate time. Documentation of, time, if they're required to check in at a certain time, what time are they logging on, what time are they logging off. Those are all just simple pieces of what that performance expectations and setting those up to tie to performance to help your employees. Setting goals and objectives. This is something that all of us in HR individuals, when we're looking at setting goals and objectives, they're the same for remote workers. They're the same for hybrid workers and workers that are in your office all the time. Everyone's goals within an organization should align to the objectives of the organization's business plan. We all want to know that what we're doing every day contributes to the benefit of the organization. It contributes to the growth, and that every role in your organization is important. No matter what the level is, there's always that impact. So being able to set goals and align those with the objectives to share with your employees. Here's why we're doing these. Here's what our suggestion is from a goal perspective. What are your thoughts? Letting that be, a conversation. Establish milestone review dates. This again is, when you have performance management programs, maybe it's a check-in every 30 days, 90 days, an annual review. Really celebrate that, you've been here and it's time for another annual review. Really communicating those changes and being positive about talking with your employees about them and their performance. Communicate changes or redirection of goals and objectives in a timely manner. Everyone knows that, sometimes goals and objectives need to change based on the travel and the business of the organization. So being able to communicate those back to your remote and your hybrid workers as well. They might not be in the office to hear that, oh, yes, we're going to change our sales goals, expectations, and meetings because of this new bid or award. If they're not there to hear that, they still should be a part of that as to why that's being different. So just keep that in mind as well. When we talk about goals and objectives, again, one of the biggest things, and especially when it comes to remote and hybrid workers, is defining and establishing specific goals and objectives for the review period. And using the SMART goal criteria to do that is essential. And why that is essential is we all know SMART goals, they're specific, they're measurable, they're achievable, they're relevant, and they're time bound. So when we look at setting up these goals for these demographic of workers, we're setting these goals specific to what their role and their accountability needs to be. We're measuring their performance based on the timeline of when their projects are due, when their meetings are to be scheduled. We're also ensuring that what we're asking them to do is achievable. We're not asking remote employees to be on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We want to be sure these achievable goals are measurable, specific, and they have to be achievable. And they're relevant as well, ensuring that they're relevant to what your goal is as an organization, and that they have a part in these roles and the benefit of moving your organization forward. And the biggest piece is the time bound, especially when you have people that you don't see every day. But that's even time bound is important for all workers. We want to have attendance at 3 employee development trainings within the first quarter of 2024. I just use that as an example, but we're giving them time-bound specifics as to what the timing is around that and what it is as well. These have been very successful in a lot of the organizations that we've worked with, and they're just very simple, but they're, again, very timely and helpful when you're looking at how to really structure goals and objectives for your remote and your hybrid workers. Leadership best practices. We've had, as you know, again, as the last 3 years, 4 years, leaders have been asked to really, pivot and change how they've come to work every day. And leaders play a role in helping employees feel connected to the organization, their team, and their work. And I can't stress that enough. Um, Organizations that, have had workers that maybe they've never worked remote before, and having a leader that's able to help lead them is important. But as a leader, how do you lead those remote workers? And in a remote world, that becomes even greater as there's more challenges to feeling barriers to them feeling a part of the team. So make an extra effort to connect with remote and hybrid employees individually. Those can be through one-on-one meetings, occasional check-ins. I, as a manager with some of my remote team, always reach out and, talk specifically. We have a set day on, Fridays at 9 a.m. that we have a call. Also, send an IM to them if you're on Teams, throughout the week. How's everything going? Is there anything I can help you out with? Those check-ins are very helpful and are helpful for you as well, to ensure. And make a Teams phone call. Anytime you can be as visible remotely as you can, that's even better, because that helps then give you that eye-to-eye contact and that ability to talk with your people. And the other piece from leading remote and hybrid teams and leading any team is being accessible. If you're a leader and you don't share your camera, you don't return phone calls, you don't answer, IMs when they come through, that's just not something that, is going to help you or your people. So being accessible is really crucial in helping to ensure that your people are supported and that you can continue to lead and share the strategic vision of your organization through all different types of methods and communication challenges. This is always the biggest one that we talk with organizations about, of how do we do this? And again, there's not one practice fits all. It's what you feel comfortable with, what your people feel comfortable with, but it's setting that expectation to know that, if I call my boss, she's going to put her camera on. Unless they're driving in a car, or, obviously somewhere where they're not at their desk. We don't want somebody to, try to talk while they're driving, but be accessible. And if it's not something that you can, answer right away, respond back and say, I'm traveling. I'll try to get back to you here in the next 5 to 10 minutes. At least you're acknowledging and you're accepting that. That goes a long way. And from a retention perspective, that's one of the biggest things that we've heard from organizations that relates to those remote workers that and hybrid workers, that I can't reach my boss. I have a question. I don't seem to get the answer as quickly as I would like to. It just seems like that is one area that we're seeing an increase, in people leaving organizations because they don't feel that they're having that response. They don't feel that they're being included. So again, another way to keep these things in mind, because you also want to retain the people that you have, given the challenging market that we have as well. We talked a little bit here about, conducting fully in-person team meetings as much as you can. A monthly in-person staff meeting where people have the opportunity to meet, share, and contribute. Some of the remote, teams that we work with, obviously, if you have a remote worker in Arizona, they're not going to come fly in for an Ohio, or a Pennsylvania-based team meeting. However, whatever you can do to try to, have in-person meetings as much as possible, or or video teams. Encourage open communication and feedback. It seems like whenever you get a different type of communication when you're sitting across from someone in a room, you can see body language, you can hear their tone. So engage, talk with people, try to be cognizant of the fact, if you're talking with someone on camera, that, you're looking at the camera, that you're not looking at your phone while you're talking to them, that you're not looking around on your desk. People really see that, and that really can take away from a discussion. Provide employees with purpose on their roles and impact. We talked about this before from a performance perspective. I've heard from employees at other organizations I've worked at before too of, well, I'm just a secretary. I'm not really, it's not important what I do. Provide employees with their purpose. That's one of the biggest things we're seeing from a performance management, especially with the demographics that we have coming into the workforce now. They want to know what their purpose is, how can they impact your business, and if they can't make an impact and don't feel they're being impactful, more than likely they're probably not going to stay. So again, keep that in mind as well. And work with your managers, your supervisors, your team leads to be sure they're trained as well on best practices for leading these teams. Share with them just what we talked about here as best practices. Um, Everything needs to start from the top of the organization and go down. So having the consistency in these type of practices, your supervisors and managers are your front lines. So they're the ones that are going to be having that initial contact with your people. So be sure they have the tools to be successful as well. I moved through that pretty quick, but I wanted to be sure that we had time for questions, as it seems that we tend to have questions quite a few times. So I'm open to any questions.
Thank you so much, Renee. You did a fantastic job. Again, topics that I think we all wrestle with, right, with the hybrid
Yes.
and remote workforce. One question that I would have is it a one size fits all approach? When you come out with a policy, do you suggest a one size fits all, or do you really suggest you really take a hard look at your roles within the organization and do what's best for the work?
Sure, great question. Thank you so much. And yes, there is not a one size fits all type thing. One of the biggest questions that you want to look at is looking at each of those individual roles and really seeing, what parts of these duties are being performed, what could be performed remotely, what could not be, and what does that look like. One of the biggest things that we see is that ability to really have options for employers to talk with other employers as well. What are they seeing? What are they hearing? Um, and that's one of the biggest things I think that I've heard from organizations is I took a piece of their policy and a piece of this policy, and we're trying to put it all together, if that helps. And there's some great resources to do that. Society for HR Management, as I've listed here. Some of the items, Harvard Business Review has an email that goes out that is free, that's very helpful. Robert Half International and Department of Labor, they also put out information as it relates to this content, but the HR management's a big resource for you.
Excellent, thank you.